by, we'll start by calling the meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. And I'll do a roll call. So I'll start on my left. Leslie here. Myself, I'm here, Rika. And then, Steve. David.
Here.
Niall. Okay, well, we have one more person joining. Darian, okay, well, I'll wait till he's seated. And Darian's here as well, so we have a quorum. I think we're missing Mitchell and other folks present, include city staff and city council members. But with that, I'll move into the approval of the agenda. Can I get someone to move to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Thank you. And can I get a second? I'll second. Thank you. So first by Darian, second by Leslie. Are there anyone opposed? No. And then I'll consider it approved. Okay, moving on to the any brief announcements from staff, commissioners, and city council liaisons. And that's from me.
Good evening, everyone. I don't have any announcements, but when you get to your regular item C on the down payment assistance program, I'll have some comments. And have you all met Linda? There, just want to make sure you've met.
Okay, great. Any brief announcements from commissioners?
I have a couple of comments. So follow up from last meeting, we had a conversation about public contracting. And it was my understanding I was supposed to bring a copy of the report we did a couple of years ago on contracting for goods. So I delivered that to Commissioner Garrettson. I have other copies if folks wish to take a look at it. My recollection was he was looking also for examples of public contracts. I had examples from 2 years ago, but those are available to him if he wants to take a look at those as well. And just as a related subject, I saw on the council agenda a few weeks ago that it had a contract for services to update the general plan. And that contract was for 2.2 million. So a significant contract. It's not paid out in 1 year is my belief, but it just shows how important these contractings can be on the expenditure side. And that was for a services contract rather than a contract for goods, which this report deals with. So just pass that on to you. And my other FYI I thought would be of interest to the commission is the council teed up an important issue that's been debated now, it seems like every other year, on what should be an in lieu fee for affordable housing, that there's an affordable housing requirement. And if a contractor wishes to, instead of building that affordable unit, would prefer paying an in lieu fee, there's a set amount. So the debate was, what should that amount be? And the city arrived at 200, my notes were 250,000 per unit. So that's the kind of thing, for instance, that this commission could provide input potentially about as to what would be the appropriate amount, looking at cost of replacement, what other jurisdictions do with those kinds of in lieu fee. It's a common tool for local jurisdictions. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Are there any others? Okay, and then we'll move into the public comment. Are there any in-person public comments? Are there any written sent in public comments? No. Well then, I will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is approval of the minutes from December 4th. if folks can take a brief look at the minutes and let me know if there are any corrections.
I will move the minutes for approval.
Okay, then I'll take a motion to.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see here anybody, so just moving on.
Okay, so first by David, is there anyone who can second the motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Darian. So second by Darian. And is there anyone opposed? Okay, don't hear anybody. So, with that, the minutes from December 4th are approved. And we'll move into the regular items on the agenda. First up is a presentation related to property taxes.
Okay, commissioners, we have Paula Cohn with HCL, Cohn and Corin companies that will be doing a presentation on property tax. Paula is our consultant for the city, again, on property taxes. So they provide us with the information, and she was gracious to spend a little bit of time with us to do a presentation here at the commission today. Paula will take a lead on the presentation, and I will pass it on to her.
Thank you, Elena. And I did provide you with a PDF copy and a presentation copy. I know that Elena wanted to run this, but I have a lot of automation in this, and saying advance, advance, advance really doesn't help me get through this. I'm going to be doing a couple of things today. I'm going to be looking at your current fiscal year 24-5. I have provided reports to your staff already and reviewed those reports. And we have just rolled out our budget forecast for 25-6. I will highlight that at the end of the presentation and take any questions. I think I should, you can write down questions, but to be honest, you will probably have a lot of questions. There are no dumb questions in property tax. If there were, I would not have a job. And so I welcome any questions you may have as I go through the slides as I'm doing the presentation. To start with, I want to talk a little bit about the timeline on property taxes. Of course, it's not advancing. And I'm going to show you the timeline for the upcoming fiscal year 25-6. That's the year that you're going to be focused on as we start moving through the next couple of months. The lien date for 25-6 was January 1st, 2025. That was a month ago. And in order for something to be enrolled on the 25-26 roll, it happened in calendar year 2024. So properties that sold last year, properties that were built last year, properties that burned down last year, all of those are being valued by the assessor, and they will be included on the roll that you're currently going to be developing your budget for. And between January and the end of June, that roll is with the assessor. If there are Prop 8s that need to be applied, he will work on those Prop 8 adjustments. Any roll changes, any roll corrections, anything that has happened after January 1st that really did stretch back into the 2024 calendar year, he's going to be looking at those, such as appeals, to get those values enrolled for the 25-26 roll. The end of June, that roll goes to the auditor's office. The auditor has 2 months to extend the roll. That means that they apply any direct assessments, any voter-approved debt, and at the end of August, they send the roll to the tax collector's office. Their job is to print and mail the bills. Typically, they go out in a September-October timeframe, and that will be in September and October 2025. Tax bills, of course, go to the taxpayers. Those taxes are due in November and February, November 2025, February 2026. They become delinquent December 10th, 2025 and April 10th, 2026. The payments go to the tax collector. The tax collector lets the auditor know that the money is here, And then the auditor apportions that revenue between November 2025 and August or June or July 2026. I will comment that none of these databases are interlinking. The assessor's data changes every day. People are buying homes, people are building homes. So he cuts that date of June 30th and then bundles that, either provides an FTP file or puts it on a zip drive or thumb drive, and somebody walks it to the assessor's office and they start working on it. When they get done, they do the same thing and take the roll to the treasurer tax collector. So these are independent processes and departments that are working on them. What is included and what is taxed are broken down into three roles: the secured role, the unsecured role, and the utility role. The secured role includes residential, commercial, industrial, institutional, your churches, irrigated land, dry land, agricultural land, a whole variety of types of properties, and as well as vacant land. And then there are assets underneath the land, like oil rights, mineral rights, water rights, that are also taxed. So those are on the secured roll. If the taxpayer fails to pay their tax bill, it's secured by a lien. 5 years after they haven't paid their taxes, the state of California, through the county of Yolo, will have an auction on some courthouse step somewhere and try to sell that property for the taxes that are owed. So those are secured by liens. Unsecured property by the name, not secured by the lien, they tend to be tenant-owned business property. And so that would look like properties that are used in offices, properties that may be leased for office use or other uses. If you've got a department store, it's going to be the racks, it's going to be the cash registers or whatever they use to store and handle the goods, as well as boats and planes. Boats and planes are taxed where they are located on January the 1st. If the boat is on someone's driveway in Davis, you're going to get the taxes on that. If it is in a harbor in Berkeley, Berkeley will get the taxes on that. Planes generally are going to be taxed either in a hangar or a tie down at an airport, and they can move from airport year to year, so those do change. And then finally, the utility role are assets that are owned by utilities. Those are valued statewide. So all of the assets, for instance, that PG&E owns in the various counties where it is located are all taxed as a single unit. That's why it's called unitary in the county or in the state. So the billions of dollars of assets that are owned by electric companies, gas companies, railroads, cell towers or telecommunication sites, as well as energy producing such as solar panels and wind farms, are all on the utility roll, among other items. So those are the items that are taxed. What is not taxed is business inventory. Before the early 80s, I can remember that there would be times when at the end of December, there would be inventory clearance sales. Companies trying to get rid of their inventory so they would have a lower tax bill. Inventory is no longer taxed. And then we talked about who does this. The assessor appraises property, enrolls new construction, administers appeals. What the assessor's job is not is to help you with your budget. And they are pretty quick to tell you that's not their job. And I'll tell you, they've got the keys to the kingdom. And it's, for me, sometimes I say, I don't understand, come on, why you're unable to tell a city what's going on. How many building permits are you processing? What do the appeals look like in the city of Davis? They don't help you with that. And the first time we know about it is after the roll is released for the next year. The auditor's job is to extend the roll and to apportion the revenue. And the tax collector's job is to print and mail the bills and collect the money. So what's been happening in the city of Davis over the past 20 years? And I'm going to make this a little bigger and then I will make it smaller in just a second. So this is a 20-year history of the values that have been enrolled in the city. Various percent changes in any given year. Some years not very much change, some years pretty large changes, particularly around the time before the Great Recession started when we had a lot of new homes being built and sold. If we look at the average growth, 4.36%. I'm not telling you you can budget 4.36% a year, but if I look at the past 20 years with the high points and the low points, that's been the average. The growth over the past 3 years has been 15.77%. Back in the Great Recession, there were 3 years where there was just a little more than 2% growth in each year. And in 2 years, it was flat, less than a third of a percent. And, we don't want to even look at the 0.04%. It was pretty flat. Then when we look at 2022-3 and 2023-4, and just to remind you that the sales that happened in calendar year 2021 are what we're seeing in 22-3. And those that happened in calendar year 2022 are what we're seeing in 23-4. Low interest rates, a lot of property sales. And that's why we saw this sort of larger than usual growth in both of those years. And if I look at the past 20 years, the values have changed 225% from this 5 million to the 11.4 million. Historical values. Another way of looking at this is to look at the roll. There are 27 tax rate areas in the city of Davis that have taxable value in them. The total number of parcels, 16,456 taxable parcels in the city. There are some government parcels that do not receive taxes, and that increases the parcel count. The unsecured bills that we looked at are bills. They are not parcels, because you can have a shopping center that can have 25 units, and people in each of those units might have product or business equipment that they're paying taxes on. And there are 24 taxable tax rate areas that are generating these unsecured assets. Total assets in the city of Davis is a little more than $11.4 billion. If you look at the rest of the cities in Yolo County, Davis has more tax rate areas than anyone else, and a tax rate area is a political subdivision where all the parcels that are assigned to that tax rate area have the same amount of their tax bill going to schools, going to the county, going to vector control, going to the library. The exact same dollar percent is going. In some tax rate areas, you might have an irrigation district that you don't have in another. And because of that, each tax rate area where there are different breakdown of those 1%, there is a requirement that they carve out a new tax rate area. Winters has 16 tax rate areas. Woodland has 10. West Sac, the newest city in the county, has 11. And Yolo County, as the unincorporated area, has 204 parcels if you're looking to annex. This is one of the reports that we have provided to staff that shows what caused the growth that we saw in 24-5. Last year in 23-4, you had $10.9 billion. This year, 11.4. Growth of $444,112,28. Growth of 4.5% year over year this year. The first item to look at here is the CPI. After Prop 13 was adopted, properties that don't sell or add new construction can be increased a maximum of 2% or the CPI, whichever is less. The CPI was more than 2% from October 2022 to October 2023, and that 2% was allowed, and that accounted for 47.5% of all the growth that you saw this year. So properties that didn't sell or add new construction that set right where they were added 1.9 of your 4% growth this year. Properties that sold, and not just single family, but multifamily, commercial, industrial, vacant land, added 148,784,308. About a third of your growth came from properties selling, adding 1.36 of your total. Looking at new construction, About 3/4 of a percentage point of your total came from properties that were either non-residential or newly residential constructed properties, and about 17% of your total 100%. So if we look at these three, you have 97% of all your growth either coming from the CPI change, the properties that sold, or the properties that were being built. On top of that, Prop 8s, which are granted to properties where the market value goes down, usually because properties currently are selling for less than someone might have bought a piece of property for. And those took a little bit away from your bottom line. The unsecured assets declined, and unsecured, as we looked at a minute ago, business property depreciates, boats and planes depreciate. So generally, we will see a little bit of a decline between tax years unless someone is buying new equipment or you're opening an Amazon warehouse and they've got all kinds of robotics that they're bringing in year one, and then those also start to depreciate. The cross-reference are possessory interests, properties that are owned by government that are being used by others. And the other changes here are the county doesn't always get sales and other items on the roll at the right time. So these may be sales that are from a prior year, exemptions that didn't get applied before the roll was released, and the percentage is small, so it's not a big item here, but I just want to point out that it is different. Looking at your growth, citywide 4.05, the general fund portion of the city grew 3.86. So that means in general terms, the revenue that you received in your general fund last year is going to grow by 3.86% for 24.5. And then the successor agency grew 4.68, and then the county grew more than 5%. So you grew about 1% less than the county did as a whole. Looking at your revenue, your general fund, we're forecasting 18,025,389. You are a teeter city, so you are to receive 100% of your revenue. This does include your unitary. It does not include your VLF in lieu. And just to step back a second to talk about that, prior to 2004-05, cities received motor vehicle license fees based on their population. Arnold Schwarzenegger gets elected. His economic recovery bonds are also approved, and the first funding source he's going to use to retire those bonds is your motor vehicle license in lieu funds. He's going to take all of that away from you. And of course, the city said, well, you can't do that. So what they decided to do was to look at what you received in the year before this election, 2003-04, and give you that amount as a lump sum, which will grow every year by the growth in your citywide value of property values. So this year's VLF in lieu is 4.05% higher than last year's was. So I have a hard time sometimes city staff want to budget that flat. There is no way that's not going to grow something, even the 2% CPI. So you should never budget your VLF in lieu flat. You should budget it at least 2% or whatever you're growing your general fund by. And then finally, your VLF, your ERAF 1 and 2. When Prop 13 was adopted, cities lost about 60% of their property taxes. State of California had a surplus, and what they did is they provided some of that to cities, and they took revenue that was supposed to go to schools, gave that to cities, counties, and special districts, and used their surplus for ADA money to schools. So the state moved along happily for 14 years until it couldn't balance their budget. And some legislator somewhere said, well, remember that bailout we gave cities, counties? It was never supposed to be permanent. We're going to take that away and give it to schools, and then we can keep the money that we were giving them as ADA. And so those two shifts happened in 1992-3, 93-4. They are permanent. They grow every year by your value increase. And right now, your ERAF 1 and 2 shifts away from your total little more than $5.2 million. And that means you would be receiving $23.2 million in general fund had ERAF not happened. I will tell you it's not going anywhere. But a lot of cities like to kind of bring the point home to the state that you've taken this money from us and it continues to grow and we lose it every year. Looking at your largest tax rate area in the city of Davis, of those 27 by value, city in that tax rate area gets 21.1 cents of the tax dollar after the ERAF shift of around 6.3. So you were getting about 27 cents in this tax rate area before ERAF hit. The other agencies that receive a 1% share are shown on the bottom. And these shares were implemented after Prop 13 based on the 3 years prior to Prop 13. So that means that in this tax rate area before Prop 13, the city of Davis roughly received about 27% of all the revenue that was being collected, and that was before the ERAF hit you. So now you receive in this tax rate area 21.1. If we blend all 27 tax rate areas and weight them in the city, come on. You receive 18.8, so you lose about 2.5% or 2.5 cents of that. Some tax rate areas get a larger share, some get a smaller share. You've got the YOLO Resource Conservation or Conservatory. You've got #2 County Road Service, and you've got the Solano County Flood Control. Those were not in the flood control from Solano County, not in this tax rate area. Yolo County Flood Control was in this tax rate area. So depending on how big this is or how small this is, the city and other shares are going to be adjusted, because if it appears in a different tax rate area, then everybody else's shares change. And it can only be 1% per Prop 13. So these are the taxing agencies anywhere in the city of Davis that receive a share of the revenue that is being collected. Comparing your weighted share with everybody else in the county, you're getting your 18.2 cents, Woodland's getting 19.4, Winters 21.49, and the late to the party is West Sacramento, and they negotiated a very good deal, getting 48.5 cents of every tax dollar collected. They became a city after Prop 13, so they had to negotiate with Yolo County for their share when they incorporated. Your revenue is shown here, broken down by secured and unsecured, as well as your unitary for the total. The county collects all of the revenue and they allocate it based on the collection that they have countywide, secured and unsecured. So they get a little less than 5% in unsecured and a little more than 95% in secured. In Davis, you are 98.6% secured and 1.4% unsecured. And the county, the county uses these percentages to come up with your total, but then allocates that total based on its receipts. And so that's why you probably are getting more unsecured than the value in Davis would generate and less secured for that same 100%. I'll remind you, when Prop 13 was adopted, we did not have computers. Or if we did, they were those big IBM things that took up a whole room and spit out cards with holes in them. And so the counties, through the legislation, had to find out the easiest way and the quickest way to get your revenue back to you, and that was through a ratio system. So your share of all taxes collected in the county applied to all revenue collected in the county will come up with the revenue that you're entitled to. On top of that, you've got an admin fee that gets taken away and the VLF in lieu that you get based on growth in property tax now. And then to look at a 10-year view, 10 years ago, as we were coming out of the Great Recession, in 2015-16, the general fund was generating about $11.5 million in revenue. Today, it generates 17, almost 0.5. So you've picked up about $6 million in property tax revenue in the past 10 years. And I know as the revenue is budgeted every year, you've got priorities where they are special programs, salaries, whatever, and those revenues have been allocated as they've come in. But in reality, you've got $6 million more to spend in 24-25 than you had in 2015-16. Your VLF in lieu, which has also grown by value change, has grown from 5.7 to 8.9 million. You've picked up 3.2 million there. And that is general purpose revenue, can be used for any of your services that you want. We show you your revenue broken down by the parcel type. So the residential parcels are noted here, your total parcels down below. I mentioned those exempt parcels that don't have any value, government owned as well, have no value, are shown here. So the revenue that's being generated in your general fund is 17.484, and then you've got another revenue source of unitary that gets added to that. And then the revenue that's being generated in your successor agency, that's being deposited in the RPTTF, the Redevelopment Property Tax Trust Fund that the county administers, is 23,706,133, if I want to round that up. So that money is deposited. Your successor agency files ROPS or has filed a last and final ROP for the balance of the project. Those ROPS are implemented by the county. They pay for your debt service, and the balance of the revenue, if available, comes back to you at your 18.8-cent share. Just a couple more slides here. Looking at your single-family home sales over the past 25 years. As we were in the Great Recession, your property taxes, your property values of a single-family home sold slipped to $407,500 in 2012. That was the low point. From that point on, you've had a number of years of double-digit growth. 2019, just about everywhere in California, was a year when there was a little bit of a stagnation. Interest rates weren't driving it. I just think that there was not a lot of homes that were being put on the market, and the values of the sale price went down. The median sale price in 2023, that's being reflected in the 24-25 fiscal year, only grew 0.75%. Again, a year of high interest rates. So they went from $795,000 to $801,000 as a median sale price. And in 2024, what we're going to be seeing next year in 25-6, the properties grew 0.5%, and they're now selling at $805,000. Remember, the median price means that half of the homes are selling for more than that, and half of the homes are selling for less than that. Your median price in comparison to the other cities in Yolo County, including the county incorporated, you have the highest median price in the county, but you also have the lowest median change. Maybe there's some correlation there, I'm not sure. West Sacramento and Yolo County had the largest percent change, but West Sacramento is second from the bottom in terms of median price, just a little bit higher than Woodland, and then Winters is in the middle of the pack with Yolo County. And to show what this means for your next year's budget, we're looking at sales in this report in 3 blocks: the entire city, the general fund, and the Davis Successor Agency. I really want to focus on the general fund, and the general fund had 355 sales transactions in calendar year 2024 that we'll see in 25. The entire city had 423. The value that's going to be added next year, the difference between the sale price and the value on the roll when the property sold, that's called the market value, that's the difference. That additive will be enrolled in 25-6. And 117,536,128 is the total difference between what people paid for those homes and what those homes were taxed out on the assessor's roll before they sold. In the city of Davis, you need $90.4 million in new values every year, or this year, to see a 1% increase in revenue, and that's 1% of your general fund value of 9.04 billion. If I divide this 717 million by the 90.4, I come up with a 1.3% additive next year. So if we've got 2% CPI or a little less than that, and 1.3% added due to sales transactions, I'm right about 3.3% growth next year without any new construction. The current year, your general fund saw growth due to home sales or other sales of 1.46%. So you're slightly under what you saw last year. And so what this looks like in a forecast tool, we know the CPI that's going to be added, the 2% for 25.6. We know that $117 million is going to be added for new properties that have sold. Those added give us a real property value, and then the base year in your former redevelopment agency is budgeted flat. That does not grow for the life of your redevelopment project. You have personal property values on the secured and the unsecured roll. You saw that your unsecured roll actually lost value this year. We budget those flat. We don't want to put any growth in until we know about it. And when all of those get added together, we're forecasting right now 3.23% growth without any new construction. New construction is a tricky thing because your building department doesn't break out new construction between your general fund and your successor agency. They just want to get the building permits processed, get the money in, and get the project on the way. So if we look at the new construction that happened in calendar year 2023, it was one of the lowest years that we've seen. If we take a trimmed average of all of these years and knock out the too high and the lowest, that would be $40 million to be added. If we were to add half of that, I don't like not adding something because you're going to see new construction. So adding half of that would give you a $20 million bump and would increase that 3.23 to about 3.4. If we add 75% of it, it's going to be about 3.5%. That's still lower than the additive that you had in the current year. I'm comfortable with that. So if you were to go back to that forecast and put in that $40 million here, that's going to raise this to about 3.5%. And that's what I'm going to tell you the forecast is for your general fund, secured, unsecured, and homeowners exemption revenue next year. You have supplementals, and supplementals have been really low for the past 2 years. I don't think I would budget anything much more than you're receiving in the current year for next year. And you are a teeter city, so you do not have to worry about delinquencies. And then finally, we look at your VLF estimate. Again, it grows by citywide growth. We've done that calculation and have shown you, again, without new construction. If you add new construction in the general fund, add it here too. If you're going to estimate something because you know that there is new construction in the city, don't leave this blank. You'll come in with a very low number. And then the last slide looks at your top 10, no, second to last slide, top 10 owners. Last year's top 10 owners are on the right. This current year's are on the left. If there's nothing in front of last year's owner, they're in the same position this year. You will notice that PacWest Diversified LP went from 3 to 4, and 3820 Chile's owner went from 4 to 3. Many of these owners just got the CPI adjustment, nothing else. And if there is a takeaway from this, we've had a number of years of unprecedented additions due to the transfers of ownership. This looks at the transfer of ownership component that you saw added in 24-5, again, based on the 23 sales. The blue is new construction, the orange is the 2% CPI, and the little bit of purple here is your unsecured. And if you compare the additive that you saw this year with the past 3 years, and then 2019 and 2018, you in some cases only had half as much as you have seen in some of these years. So this is one of the reasons, this was 1.46%. Right now, I'm telling you, you're going to get 1.3. So it's going to be a little slower, a little lower than we're seeing in 24.5. And it's the reason that you're not seeing these 5 and 6% growth that you've seen in some of the other years. Okay, my next slide is questions. And I'm not going to stop the share in case you've got a question that you want me to go back and look at something. And if I will tell you that every time I do this for a board, the executive director of the board tells me it's like drinking from a fire hose. And I have a lot of fire departments that I do this for. I totally get that. Property taxes are complex. There are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of different roles that generate your revenue.
Sort of historically, you're making a forecast is made. What's the variance actual versus forecast in a, say, a 5-year period, 10-year period, just to understand the accuracy we're talking about?
We're usually within 1% and 85% of our forecasts, so we're close. And
1% of the total tax? That
1%, yeah, we're within 1% of what your growth is going to be. Now, if you're a city that's got 4 industrial warehouses that are going to come on at $60 million each, and you don't put anything in that new construction line item, my estimate is going to be very low. Because I don't have your building official information to be able to populate that. And as city staff, you're going to have a better chance of getting that than I might.
is that forecast variance biased one way or the other? Too high, too low?
It's generally low. I'm a conservative budgeter. If you don't put in new construction, you're going to have a conservative estimate.
And then finally, you had a slide that showed the areas, cities within the county and then the county, and it had significant differences. We looked at West Sac, was like at 40%, but very different.
This one?
Yeah. Can you explain the differences there?
Sure. When Prop 13 was adopted, or before Prop 13 was adopted, and what cities did was they would establish a mill rate to be taxed every year. So you would know the revenue you wanted to generate. The assessor would give you an estimate of the value that he would be taxing next year. You would divide your revenue by the value and you would get a fraction. And so cities had a mill rate, school districts had a mill rate, the county had a mill rate, flood control had a mill rate, and all those added together ended up being a 2 or a 3% tax load on the taxpayer. Howard Jarvis comes around, a lot of senior citizens on fixed incomes were being priced out of their homes, and was able to get Prop 13 adopted. And Prop 13 did a couple of things. It limited the value that could be taxed to 1%, could only increase by 2% a year, and in order to increase taxes, you had to have a 2/3 vote of the electorate. So now the auditors were faced with, how do we take this mill rate system and put it into this 1% tax? So what they did is they took the 3 years prior to Prop 13. So we're looking at 1976, 77, and 78, and looked at the revenue that every city, every school district, the county got in each tax rate area. So if the schools got 40% of all the revenue in those 3 years, they got a 40-cent share of the tax dollar. And if a city got 25% of all the revenue, they got a 25-cent share. The county might have got a 30 and everybody else got pennies. And so that's how these amounts were established before ERAF came along and took about 25% of all the city's amounts away from you. So West Sacramento was not a city when Prop 13 was adopted. They became a city in 1987, I believe it is. And so they had to negotiate with the county for its share. So if you look at a county tax rate area, you don't have a city in it. You've got a county, you've got the schools, and you may have some resource districts, but the city, which normally was getting a 20-cent share, is all going to the county. So the county may have been getting, let's say, 40 cents. And so the city of West Sac went in and said, okay, we want our share of what you're getting, but we also want what you are allocating to police and fire because we are going to take over the police and fire services. You cities down here already had that police and fire in your mill rate. And so you were stymied. You couldn't go and say, well, we want more because we've got police and fire because you already were doing that in your mill rate. West Sac didn't have a mill rate. So not only could they negotiate for their share of the county levy, they could negotiate for their share of the county share of the police and fire levy. That's why they get a high share.
Thank you.
And I actually went online to try to find the incorporation documents, but I can't find them. The incorporation documents would actually show a calculation of how this was going to be handled.
Can I follow up to that? Because this is one of the slides that caught my interest. So I see the cities, they add up to 100%, the four cities. And I'm not clear what.
No, they don't add up to 4%.
They don't add up to 100. What do they add up to?
No, because each city is in a tax rate area, and the tax rate area adds up to 1%. But
Okay, so
yeah,
go ahead.
okay, but the city of Davis only gets in this tax rate area 21 cents. The schools get 33 cents here. They're going to get all of this ERAF stuff that's been carved away. So the school's probably going to end up with something close to 50% of the revenue.
Okay, so go back to the slide. So
if I were to show you West Sacramento, West Sacramento and it would be getting, let's say, 48 cents, but the county might only be getting a nickel in that tax rate area because it's giving away everything to West Sac.
So can you translate these percentages into
They're only comparative to each other. They cannot be summed.
Yeah, I'm sorry for talking over you. I thought you were done. I'm asking, can you translate those percentages into actual numbers of revenue so we can get a feel of what those actually mean?
I would have, yeah. See, what you have to understand is, oh, I had that. I don't know if I've got a copy of that. I do not. Every city has a different value pool. Okay. And many of these cities, Davis and West Sac have got redevelopment. I don't know if Winters and Woodland do. So let's say that Woodland has a total of $2 billion of value. You would take 1% of that $2 billion times their 19-cent share, and that would tell you their revenue. But in the city of Davis, $9 million is in your general fund, and $9 billion is in your general fund, and $2 billion is in your successor agency, which has a whole different scheme of how that revenue is collected and allocated. So looking at your $9 billion times 1% times your 18.8, that's where you're getting your $18.25 million of revenue. I can provide you with a report that shows you each of these cities' revenue. In fact, stick with me. I knew I've got it. No, I don't have it on this one. I'll do that. There's a report that the county puts together that shows the total revenue to be collected, and I'll provide that to you. Rather than me doing it, I'll give you a county report.
Well, I'm not asking you to do that if that
It's a report that's available on the county website. So I'll just capture it and provide it to you. It'll show you every school district, the county, everybody's share of the revenue.
Yes. So go back to that slide one more time, if you would, please. So it raises the question to me about whether those percentages are appropriate for today and what would be the consequences if they were adjusted.
Okay, here's the
So
thing.
do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, I do have an answer to that.
Okay.
So these are in stone. In order for you, backspace once. In order for you to get more money, somebody else has got to give up some of theirs. So let's say that you go to the vector control, because I know that's here somewhere, right? Thought I saw that. Yeah, so say you go to the vector control, which is getting 0.8 cents of every tax dollar, and you say, we want to negotiate and we'd like half of your share. What's the first thing they're going to tell you? You want to take care of rats or you want to take care of mosquitoes? Because we can't do it all without this. Schools are prohibited from giving up any of their money. Because if they give up some of their money, then the state has to backfill with ADA, and so that hurts the state. And the state doesn't levy a property tax. So now you're left with a cemetery district, and they're going to say, you want to take over care of our cemetery? We'll let you do that. You want to bury the folks and take care of all of the grounds? There's not a lot that you do in the city work that translate. The county has to provide health, safety, jails, courts, that they're mandated to do that with the share that they get, which is 8 cents in comparison to your 18 cents. So I don't think they're going to scream poor if you try to take away some of their money because you're already getting more than they are. So, and I'm guessing that if I give you this graph of every of those cities, the weighted average, you're going to see that these cities in most cases are getting more than the county. So the county is not going to be willing to parlay or negotiate to give away any of theirs without you assuming some of the responsibility that they have to cover.
So I think what you're saying, that there would be a similar graph for the city of West Sacramento, but
Yeah.
it would have.
There's one for every,
Okay.
yeah, I'll give you those. The other thing is that after Prop 13 was adopted, and these were pretty much set in stone before ERAF came and eroded some of your total, the only way to get more revenue is to go to the voters. And that's a tough sell. You know, cities that go to the voters for paramedic taxes, where you're going to increase the paramedic service, sometimes those go through. And usually they're small taxes. They're 15 cents per $100 of value. I mean, that they're not a big tax. But or $15 for the entire year. But you know, I don't know of any city that's been able to negotiate away some of this without assuming a responsibility. A light district, for instance, that's no longer providing any service. Sometimes the cities are able to wrestle those away and take over the care of the light maintenance for the 2 cents or 1 cent that was charged for a light maintenance district.
David, just to interrupt, you have another question, because I do want to make sure we have enough time for everyone to have.
Yes, I have one more question.
Okay.
Yeah, one more question, just related. So it just raises the question for me. I think you're going to show West Sacramento, but what I heard was there was a negotiation with West Sacramento and the county over this, and West Sacramento was a startup city. 87, I think you said, was the date. So I just wonder if the presumptions and the fairness of that time period are still reflected now in 2025, and whether there's a basis to take a fresh look at this. But I hear what you're saying. Hard to renegotiate it, stuck in stone, but that'd be my question. So when I see your what you're going to share with West Sacramento, that's what I'm going to be looking for.
Right. The thing is that West Sacramento became a city before ERAF, which was which happened 70, which happened 5 years later. So they got hit by ERAF as you did. So they were getting more than 48 cents before ERAF hit them. So at that point, you know, they were harmed in the same way you were, losing 25% of what they used to get for the services they were supposed to provide. And again, I don't know the deal. The records back to 1987 are not available. Even the data that we've purchased from the county don't have West Sacramento's information in it until like 1990. So it took a couple of years for them to get all the information pulled together. But I will provide you with West Sac. They're a client. Please don't go shaking your fist at them. Any other questions?
Kyle, you look like you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. Can we get a copy of this presentation?
Yes.
I provided copies.
After the meeting.
Oh, great. It's on the regular website with the
Yes.
agenda.
That's correct. Is there anyone on the front who has any questions? No. Okay. Sure.
Just one other question. So we got a difference between market value and the value on the rolls of a home. And the question is there any reason to believe structurally Davis is different in terms of untapped value versus other communities?
We have a report that we developed that looks at properties that sell and looks at a per square foot price on that sale and applies it to the rest of the database that hasn't sold for market value. I mean, it was a way that we thought we could sort of jerry rig. If everything were to sell today and it were to sell for the same square footage, what would that market value look like? And I'll be glad to give you that report so you can see if everything were to sell, what that market value increase would be in the city of Davis. Or any other
So
city.
what I'm looking is to compare that community to community just to see if we're structurally different. In other words, is our housing inventory turning at the same rate as other communities?
I'd have to run reports to know. I think regionally, the answer is going to be yes. You know, what's happening in Davis, what's happening in San Diego County? Probably not. You know, geography, I guess. But, you know, I can provide that for whether you just want to look at YOLO, whether you want to look at YOLO and Yuba and Butte, you know, whether you want to look at Sacramento County, some cities there that if there are cities that you see yourself comparable to, whether it's the growth, whether it's the small, you know, you've got a college campus, so does Chico, for instance, you know, those kinds of things. Chico had a really big rush on their properties back when the Paradise Fire happened. I went up there was no property for rent, no property for sale. And so they were started building after that. So they had a little bit of a bump that maybe some other cities wouldn't have because of that issue.
Thank you.
But, you know, I've got 300 reports. Anything that you think that you'd like to see, I'm sure somebody else has asked for it in the past, and we've created a report for it. So I'll pull together what we've talked about. But as you look at the materials that Elena's going to give you, if something else triggers a question, have her send me an email or you send me an email and we'll pull it together for you.
Okay, thank you. Any other final questions?
Are you asking the entire panel or?
Yes, everybody.
Everybody.
I want to be cognizant of time because we have more items on the agenda.
I had a couple more, but how about if I just a couple minutes? Yeah,
Question.
I do have a question. So could you go back then? Okay, I'll pass. I can see you're not.
I just wanted to make sure nobody else had it.
I'm passing. Yeah, I hear you. You got other people.
But nobody else has a question. Okay, well then I will see if there's a public comment. Anyone here for in-person public comment? Any recorded public comment? No. And then with that, we can move into the sales tax presentation.
Thank you, Paula. Appreciate that. Hello. So the next presentation is going to be by a consultant. HCL companies. They provide our sales tax consulting services. And Susie Woodstock from HCL will do the presentation.
Good evening. Thank you, Elena. I will go ahead and share my screen, I guess, too. Let me share it.
Susie, can you speak up a little bit?
Yes. Let me get to my speaker. Okay. As Elena said, I'm going to talk about the sales tax portion of your revenue. Mine's a little bit more about how sales tax works. First off, we have the sales tax rate for the city of Davis is 8.25. It consists of two parts. 7.25% of that is the statewide base rate. In that 7.25, about 6% of it is going to the state. About 1/4% goes to countywide transportation funds, and 1% goes directly to cities or counties. In your case, sales that occur in the city of Davis, you get this 1% of. You also have a voter approved add-on tax, Measure O, of 1%. Agencies can get voter approved add-on tax of up to a max of 2%. So the max rate that anybody should have in the state is about 9.25%. You can get legislative approval to exceed that 2% cap. So there are multiple agencies who are above the 9.25 maximum rate. The 1% Bradley Burns is, again, it is a direct allocation based on point of sale. The voter approved add-on tax, Measure O, is based on more point of use. So they apply differently, and we'll get into that in additional slides. So today I'm going to talk about your 1% Bradley Burns. That comes in two parts. One of them is your brick and mortar stores, transactions that occur in the city. The other, since there is the point of sale is out of state, it comes from out of state origins, that goes through these county-wide pools. That is all still this 1% on the transaction. It just has two different parts to it. And then I'm going to walk through how Measure O works. Sales tax comes in quarterly remittance. There are two advances and a cleanup, but basically taxpayers file a quarterly return. So the most detail we have is on a quarterly basis. It does have a little bit of a lag, not as much as property tax. So for sales that occur in January, February, March, you get your final payment in May, and we would get that data in June. So there is still a little bit of a delay in when we're seeing the data related to the sales. So first I'm going to talk about that 1% Bradley Burns. What is taxed? Sales tax is imposed on all tangible personal property. Again, it applies when there is a point of sale in California. It is only levied once when the final consumer purchases it. So if a dealer sells it to a retailer and then the retailer sells it to the consumer, the first transaction was wholesale. The sales tax does not apply. It does not apply until you go to the final sale. There's a lot of exemptions to this tangible personal property. And about 85% of revenue is generated from about 5% of businesses. Things that are not taxed. Property, you did not pay sales tax. We didn't hear sales tax in Paula's presentation. Utilities, as long as they're coming through the bulk pipes, gas, electricity, water. Interestingly, electricity, if you put a solar panel on a carport and you are selling that to charge a car, technically that is considered taxable and would be taxed, but gas, electricity, and water that is going through the main services supplies is not sales taxable. Merchandise sold to the federal government, lower government not taxing the higher government. Food sold for home consumption. In general, this is the food at the grocery store, but there is a book about an inch thick about how food is taxed. So there is some exceptions there too. Prescription medicine is not taxed. Goods transmitted electronically. If you rent a movie on Netflix, you do not pay sales tax on that. There's a lot more things that are not taxed. There's a big publication on that. So the other part of that 1% Bradley Burns was use tax. Its official name is sales and use tax. Use tax is when there is not a point of sale in California. It is stuff that is shipped from out of state to a point of sale. This is the part that is distributed through the county-wide pool. Anything that is shipped from out of state into Yolo County goes into this one big pool, and it's distributed by a portion method, which we'll look at too. So we call the brick and mortar portion a direct allocation. So all the businesses in your city that pay directly to the city sales tax, that's the direct allocation, because if a transaction occurs in the city, you get the 1% of that transaction. The indirect is that merchandise coming from out of state. It is not based on the portion of the sale. It's a distribution method, which again, we'll look at in just a second. But both of these things are that 1% Bradley Burns. When we look at the 1% Bradley Burns, we're breaking it into major industry group categories to see how each of these categories trend. We have autos and transportation, building construction, business and industry, food and drugs, fuel and service station, general consumer goods, restaurants. And then the 8th category is those pools, that use tax coming from out of state vendors. Looking at third quarter, which was July, August, September, the statewide results, you can see the different categories trend differently. Autos and transportation was down 4.8. Fuel and service stations in third quarter was down 13% because of gas prices being down. Restaurants were up just a little, and that countywide pool, people buying online merchandise from out of state, was up 3%. And then a few other things were down. Third quarter in general was one of the slower quarters we have seen. We've been seeing consumers pulling back in general, but this quarter was down 2.3% on a statewide basis. Also looking at it by region, the Sierras were down about 5.9% in this July, August, September time period. And your region was down about 1.1%. So you're not seeing as big of a decline as lots of the other regions did, but you see all regions were down. Again, why we break these into major industry groups. You can see, looking at the different groups, there's different growth projections for these different groups. So if you are heavy in autos and transportation, it is your biggest major industry group in the city of Davis. These projections are going to influence your sales tax more than if you are heavy in general consumer goods, which is actually your third biggest group in the city. And we also talk by major industry group because the individual sales tax data is confidential. It has to be grouped into a larger group, so we do not disclose individual taxpayer information. We, the consultants and local government, are allowed to see it for official use. We cannot use it for any personal gain when you're looking at specific taxpayer information. Looking at your 1%, Davis's 1% Bradley Burns by major industry group. Like I said, autos and transportation is about 23% of your sales tax revenue. Restaurants and hotels, about 21%. And your direct allocation biggest group is general consumer goods at 13%. The pool is actually coming in your third group. Again, this is the indirect. It is going to a countywide group that will be distributed by a proportion. Building and construction and business and industry, both really small groups for your Bradley Burns. And so if what's happening in these two categories isn't really going to affect your long-term trends, autos and restaurants and general consumer goods are really going to drive some of your growth. If we look at Davis's 13-year trend for your major industry groups by Bradley Burns, you can see some really big shifts. This light blue group is your autos and transportation. Had some businesses that are no longer in the city back in 15, 16, 16, 17. You can see for the last 2 years, we've been seeing slowing in the auto and transportation group. Your restaurants and hotels are your second biggest, well, they're your first biggest group right now. You can see the V-shaped recovery that was a discussion during the pandemic, definite slowing recovery. And then you see kind of steeper growth because we've had continuing rising menu prices. The pools is your third biggest group, and then general consumer goods here also having a dip during the pandemic, continuing on a little bit flat. Food and drugs, and then fuel and service stations seeing slowing as prices have come down. Okay, so I've mentioned the pool. It's your third biggest group. It's about 19% of your revenue. How does the pool work? So the pool is proportioned based on how your brick and mortar stores compare to the other brick and mortar stores in the county. In third quarter here, it shows that you generated 13.8% of all the brick and mortar sales throughout the county. So you get 13.8% of the pool. Again, the pool is everything that's coming from out of state. It was about $2.3 million in third quarter alone. That was up a little bit. So if we look at that breakout, you're getting 13.8% of 2.3 million. You're getting about 326,000 from that portion of the pool. You can see that if another city gets a new business, if they get a new warehouse or a new business that is generating big point of sale, that's going to make your share of the pool smaller. So the pool doesn't necessarily always grow based on the receipts going to the pool. The pool can be affected by how the neighbors' brick and mortar sales are doing. That's why this is called the indirect method, because it's not directly allocated based on the sale happening in your city. What types of things are in the pool? The biggest category is business and industry. So some business to business things that are coming from out of state. General consumer goods is the second biggest category. So we can break the pool down into these categories also. About 35.8% of the merchandise being shipped into the county is general consumer goods. Autos and transportation, a little bit different than coming from out of state. It is private party used car sales. So if I sell you my car, when you register it, if you register it to a Yolo County address, you would pay the sales tax on that transaction, and the sales tax would be distributed to this Yolo County pool. Building and construction, also a little different, not necessarily merchandise coming from out of state. If a contractor installs their own product, then that would go to the pool where they do the install. So for instance, a flooring store. The point of sale is not necessarily the store where you went and picked out what you're going to have installed. If that contractor installs it themselves, the sales tax goes to the county pool where they do the install, because that's where the transaction actually occurs. You pay for the install that happened at your house. So building and construction in the pool has to do with contractors installing their own merchandise. A little bit more on online transactions. So I've talked about the online transactions that were coming from out of state. They're going to the pool. Brick and mortar stores, general consumer goods, 100% of the over-the-counter transactions that occur in your city are point of sale, and you get that 1% Bradley Burns directly. But the third type of online shopping that we have for general consumer goods are fulfillment centers that are located in the state. These in-state fulfillment centers actually go to the agency where the fulfillment center is located. So if the merchandise is in California at the time of the order, then where it's located is the point of sale. This is where the merchandise is at the time of order. So about 43% of online shopping is going to agencies who have those fulfillment centers. About 57% of online shopping, 57% is coming from out of state warehouses, and that is going to the pool. Overall, the difference between brick and mortar and online shopping, we know it's been growing for several years. Here you can see this blue line that's growing is the online shopping, while our brick and mortar have slowed a little over the last few years. This is just a little more detail. It's a little more complicated than what I've been saying. Lots of different types of online and where it ends up being distributed to, and of course, online or in-store goes to the jurisdiction. One online picked up in the store, that actually is another type of online that does go to the local jurisdiction. So if your local store is fulfilling online orders off of their shelves, then you do get that as a direct allocation. So a lot of.
Yeah.
Susie, there's a question.
Yeah, sorry, Susie.
Yes. No, please.
I have a sick kid, I'm gonna have to go, and so I wanted to just confirm one thing that you said, and I want to make sure it's really clear, that when the city of Davis doesn't have a big consumer base, it loses to direct sale, but then when people can't buy stuff because there's not stuff downtown, and they order stuff online, they lose again, because the ratio of the online sales from the pool is also based on that same location of the physical stores. And I just wanted to just confirm that that's, how Davis.
That is absolutely correct for this 1% measure or 1% Bradley Burns. When I get a little further down, measure O is different than this, and it's anything shipped in. So yes, that's true for your Bradley Burns, but your measure O, you get that anything shipped in, you get the whole 1% of measure O.
Well, thank you. I have to go deal with this again. I know the down payment assistance things on the end. If there is a subcommittee about that, I'm happy to volunteer for it, and I apologize. Thank you.
Okay. Just another trend line. This is all online sales, same sort of thing. The top is the indirect, showing that the pool portion has slowed as more in-state warehouses are built. We're about 57 and 43% at this point. One more comment on these warehouses. The tax only applies if it is a fulfillment center and the merchandise is located in that warehouse at the time of sale. There's a lot of big warehouses in the state, and they are not producing tax. I would call them more transfer station. You can see some are called sortation center, delivery stations, inbound cross dock. So the merchandise doesn't stay there. The merchandise is either being unloaded from a bigger shipping and then being sent to different fulfillment centers, or it has already been pulled off the fulfillment center shelf and it's getting to that last mile sorting thing. So not all of these big warehouses that we see are generating tax, just the fulfillment centers where the merchandise is located. So that is sales tax, that's that 1% Bradley Burns. Now I'm going to talk about your Measure O and how that works and the difference between that. Measure O is officially called a transaction and use tax. Other names is a district tax, an add-on tax. They are all the same thing, just trying to describe it a little bit better than a transaction and use tax. And it is delivery or destination based. It is still taxing the same things. But now it's going to follow the goods to the consumer, no matter where they came from. So where it comes from in one of those big warehouses no longer matters. It only matters if it's delivered into the city. Most of your over-the-counter transactions will apply. Of course, they are not going to ask you if, you know, where you're from, if you're filling up your gas tank or if you're eating out at a restaurant. So all the over-the-counter things still apply, but things delivered in, all pay it. If your businesses are shipping out, they do not pay it. Again, delivering in or delivering out doesn't pay it. The other difference is autos and transportation. If your dealers sell a car, doesn't necessarily mean Measure O will apply. Measure O only applies to cars that are registered to a Davis address. It does not matter where you purchased the car from. It only matters if you register it to a Davis address. So your dealerships, it doesn't matter how they're doing. It only matters how your locals are purchasing cars. And you can see that here. So your 1% Bradley Burns is your sales tax, and your Measure O is also 1%. If these applied equally, these ratios would all be 100%. They would be exact, but they don't apply equally. Like I said, for autos and transportation, the sales tax is what is being sold in Davis. The transaction tax is who in Davis is buying a car and registering it to a Davis address. Again, if it was all equal, the ratio would be 100%. It's a little bit more. Building and construction, business and industry, there are some over-the-counter transactions that will pay the transaction tax, but again, we saw that these are some smaller slices of your overall revenue. So you have a lot more things that are shipped in. That's why these ratios are significantly above 100%, because you have more things being shipped in. Doesn't matter where it comes from. If they ship it in, they will pay Measure O. Food and drugs, fuel and service stations, restaurants and hotels usually track pretty closely. You can see you do have a little bit of fuel delivery, that there are fuel delivery businesses. For restaurants and hotels, this is actually delivery of restaurant food also. We have Uber Eats, DoorDash. If they deliver from outside of Davis into the city, they will pay it. So that's why this one is also a little bit higher. And then general consumer goods, of course, it's all your general consumer goods stores, plus all the online merchandise that is shipped into the city. What you see here is your sales tax had that indirect pool allocation. There is no indirect pool allocation with a transaction tax. It's all directly applied in the categories. Overall, the 1% of Measure O generates basically 1.44 of sales tax. It's almost it's 44% more than what your sales tax Bradley Burns is generating. Looking at your 8-year trend for the major industry groups for Measure O, we also track this by industry group. Your general consumer goods has grown significantly. In 2019, there was some legislation that required out-of-state vendors to start paying California sales tax when they ship in. Prior to that, technically, we were supposed to report any online merchandise that we bought that came from out of state that didn't pay sales tax. So, you know, most people didn't know they should have been reporting that on their state income tax at the end of or in April each year. So we had a legislation that required, there was a case of South Dakota versus Wayfair that required that South Dakota one saying that just because you're out of state, if you're shipping into this state, you should pay our sales tax. California piggybacked on that, and we adopted legislation that required those out of state vendors to start paying in California also. So in 2019 and 2020, that was being implemented, that it was new revenue that we previously were not collecting. And then, of course, we had the pandemic. And then we've had inflation. So you've seen some gains in general consumer goods for the last couple of years. And then in 21, 22, we've started seeing things slow down a little bit. Your second biggest group in Measure O is autos and transportation, and it's continuing going up. Again, this is who's buying a car and registering it to a city address. Your third biggest group in 23, 24 was your business and industry. Business and industry can be a big eclectic group. It's a lot of business to business. It has medical biotech. It has, let's see, it has office supplies. It has electrical equipment. It can have purchases of fire trucks in it. It really fluctuates a lot more. It does not have as steady of a pattern as some of the other categories. Restaurants and hotels, you can see the big dip here. Again, this is going to follow pretty closely to your 1% Bradley Burns. And then you've got fuel and service stations also dipped during the pandemic, and your food and drug category here. A few things about that are impacting sales tax recently. We've got tax sharing reporting. AB 2854 is requiring agencies to start reporting to the state if they are sharing their sales tax revenue with the taxpayer. So a lot of times agencies will make a tax sharing agreement to attract a business to their city. They will now be required to report how much of the sales tax they are returning to the taxpayer, and it will also have to be posted on websites. Other things related to those tax sharing agreements, really this is just requiring some notification. There was a push to eliminate tax sharing agreements. The governor did not sign those, but there are some additional codes related to those tax sharing agreements. AB 1228 is that fast food minimum wage. It took effect April 1st of 2024. It required national fast food chain restaurants in California to pay a minimum wage of $20 an hour. What you can see here is that caused menu prices to go up when these fast food restaurants had to start paying a higher amount. And you can see second quarter and third quarter. We only have 2 quarters of data since that was implemented, but we're seeing some slowing in those revenue numbers. And you can see here, menu prices in California compared to menu prices growth in other states. Our menu prices have gone up more. In general, our menu prices have gone up about 7% in California. Nationally, all restaurant menu prices have gone up about 3.5%. So when you have rising menu prices, if there was no change to foot traffic, you would expect to see this go up. But you can see those rising menu prices have deterred the restaurant group diners from going out and then reducing some of the restaurant group revenue. Related to that 2% cap that I talked about, that there's a base rate of 7.25 sales tax, and that some agencies get authorization to exceed that 2%. Here's some of the recent ones that are allowing some areas to go above that 2% cap. There's a much longer list of approved ones. This is just the most recent approved ones. I do have a 5-year outlook of statewide sales tax. 23-24 came in down about 1.3%. So 24-25, we are looking at that continuing to slow, as we saw slowing in some of those big purchases. Consumers are still shopping, but they are making some cost-conscious choices, and they are not spending quite as much as they were. They're looking for value in their purchases, and we're seeing that as slowing in 24, 25. But 25, 26, and the outer years, we're expecting sales tax to step back up again. I have some references, but this is the last slide, so I can't answer questions. I didn't put the projections in. Elena didn't mention that she wanted those, but I do have that if you are interested in seeing some of the sales tax projections that we have.
Are there any questions? Hi Susie, thanks for the presentation. A quick question on the indirect allocation, on how it's determined by like the brick and mortar sales, and that's how much we get out of the pool. Is that determined by statute? Like how do they come up with the calculus for the indirect allocation, and like how is that reevaluated? Is that a statutory thing?
I believe it is statutory. There has been a city manager working group looking at some of this. And one of the conclusions is if you want to change it, it would have to go back to the voters. So it's not just able to change that.
Any other questions?
I have a question, so I'll have to defer to others. Good, yeah, thank you. So thank you for your presentation. I did have trouble hearing some of it, so you may have covered this, but I'm interested in, are there numbers about what the per capita rate is for sales tax? How much does each Davis resident pay relating to sales tax, and how does that compare to other cities, other jurisdictions? Is that kind of information available?
There is, and let me open that up right now. I do have that. I do have a report on that.
And to save time, you can just send it. I could just read it. I don't want to take up too much time. If it's easier to do it that way.
Okay, I'm running it. We'll see if it opens up quickly. But yes, we do compare on a per capita basis. Nope, it's thinking slowly, but when it opens, I will pull it over. I'm not sure, it's taking quite a while. Hopefully, there we go. So here is what per capita looks like. And this is the group of cities that has been picked to share with. Of course, this is your brick and mortar divided by, of course, the population, making it a per capita. It does not include the pool, because some of these you can see are cities that are from different counties, and pools have different influence. So this is only your brick and mortar divided by. And this count over here, the count is the number of open sales permits. So it's not exactly the number of businesses, because there can be permits that people open and then they don't close. There can be some businesses that open multiple ones. So it's a kind of a ballpark of the number of businesses, but it's not an exact count.
So if I'm reading this right, Davis has the lowest per capita of the cities listed. In the city, it looks like West Sacramento, for instance, is one of the top cities. So it looks like a difference between 10,000 at the top and 2,000 at the bottom at Davis. Do I have that right? And if so, I want to know what do you think are some of the reasons for that difference in per capita, tax revenue?
You do have that right, and it is the business makeup. I'm not sure of what West Sacramento, or for that matter, San Luis Obispo, both of those are up here. It can be, what this tells you is they have more businesses that are serving outside of their city. So if they have fulfillment centers, you have a few car dealers usually do help push you up on this list. And if you and so, but it can also be the population, the denominator of this equation, that if you have a higher population and fewer businesses, that's going to bring you down on this graph.
Susie, I also wanted to add, just as a sample, we show San Luis Obispo. San Luis Obispo has a mall with a high-end stores. Davis doesn't. So this is per capita sales, so not sales tax, but sales, gross sales. So other cities on the list may have bigger business base. Like Susie said, perhaps they have sometimes, I think she mentioned warehouses or something like that. So if we didn't have, I'm gonna say, maybe Target or bigger stores, that number would probably be lower. So the other cities likely have not just more stores, but they have stores that may be selling at the high rates. Like, as I mentioned, San Luis Obispo has, you know, a lot more stores that are kind of on a higher end, or they have a mall, as an example.
Does some of this have to do with the student count?
I'm not sure, I don't necessarily think so.
Less per capita.
Steve, I think, yeah. So the question was about if the student count affects this. I'm not sure, we can certainly ask Susie, but what we asked to look at as part of the reason why some cities were selected as comparison is because some of them are college towns. So for example, we have San Luis Obispo, there's a college there. Chico has a college there. Merced has a college. So part of it, just to see how do we compare as college town to college town.
And this is the Department of
It's
Finance
regional.
population data. So it would come from what the Department of Finance has.
If I buy something on campus, does that sales tax treated any differently than if I buy something on Fifth Street?
It would be treated the same.
If it's considered a state land, then it may be different. If their shop is within the city of Davis limits, then yes, it would be.
The bookstore in Davis versus a bookstore on campus, is the sales tax on those two transactions go to different places?
Yes. A family on campus goes to the county.
Back to back.
We have time for one more question?
There's time for questions.
Sure, thank you. So I want to take advantage of your expertise. Do you have any recommendations for the city of Davis relating to possibilities of increasing, making improvements in sales tax? And the reason I'm asking, so we just did make an improvement with Measure Q and that vote. And what I see is a lot of these other possible things related to sales tax, they're wired by state law, which then would limit anything Davis could do other than creating an environment that allows for more sales transactions, right? More sales because of more stores or what have you. Do I have that right, or what would you think, and what would you recommend?
You know, big stores that are attracting regional purchasers, or business and industry that is a point of sale, that they're developing a item that they're selling to the whole state. You know, things like a big store that is a regional attraction like a Costco. there's a lot of business and industry that are developing products and they are point of sale and they sell their products that get shipped all throughout California. Those are both, can be big generators. There is a concept that an order desk, so if you have, warehouses, or if you have multiple stores throughout the state, and there is a centralized order desk that is actually processing all the orders and the merchandises in California, that is point of sale. That order desk is where the transaction is occurring. And so in that case, if you are the order desk, it does not matter where, if the merchandise is in your city or not, as long as it's in California and you are that order desk, then the point of sale is to you. One of the cities I worked at had a small fulfillment center for a small business, but it was a good amount of revenue that was being generated for that city. And the fulfillment center left. And so we thought we were going to lose it, but they actually left like 8 employees that were the sales force for that business. And we kept the point of sale, even though the fulfillment center left, because those salesmen were the point of sale. They were making all the transactions for that business. So somehow getting the sales office, it has to be a person that is a person that is in the transaction. A lot of these big online fulfillment centers, the point of sale ends up with the merchandise because that's the first time a person is in that process, because so much of it's online. So you do have to be a little careful with that online aspect of it. It has to have human interaction. But I mean, you've got car dealerships. Those are a good generator. But yes, we saw in your pie chart that building construction was a smaller group. That's another group. That's another type of business that can attract more regional, regional sales.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or clarification?
If you have time, do you mind if I ask one question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Susie, this is just something I'm actually extremely curious about. If someone orders something online from Amazon or anywhere pretty much, and it's coming from Asia and you're in California, you'll notice that it typically arrives at the Port of Los Angeles and then goes to Vernon, California. And I'm very familiar with Vernon and the history of Vernon. And then it's processed and sent to the recipient. Where is the tax that's being paid on those goods going? Do you know, are you familiar with this pattern, or I'm just curious, and we don't have to take up time in this meeting, but I've been very curious about it, given what I know about Vernon.
There are several Asian companies that are shipping directly to consumers. And if they're shipping directly to consumers, they are in the pool. And we see them in a lot of the top 20 vendors in the pool. If it wasn't directly ordered and they are just supplying a warehouse in Vernon, and when it's ordered, they pull it off a shelf from Vernon, then it's going to go to that warehouse. So it just depends on how it's ordered.
I won't belabor this. It's not coming from Vernon. It is coming from Asia. And it goes through about 10 different points and processing points in Asia. Then it comes to the Port of Los Angeles and then to Vernon. But I won't belabor that point here. But it's just fascinating to me. So thank you.
Sure. Are there any final questions on this item? If not, then I will open it up for public comment. Do you have any in-person public comment? Any recorded or anything? No. Then with that, we can move on to the next item, which is the down payment assistance loan program. Thank you, Susie. Thank you. Donna, did you want to speak to?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Sorry, I didn't know if Elena wanted to make a few comments. So as some of you may know, at a recent city council meeting, city council took action to start the process of adopting an ordinance that actually authorizes a first-time homebuyers assistance program. It's the ordinance process, so it went out for first reading, came back for second reading at our last meeting, and then it will be enacted within 30 days. That ordinance was very high level. It basically just authorized the creation of a program. But it didn't really contain programmatic elements. It didn't fill in all the necessary details that you'd need to have in place to actually effectively administer a program. And so one of the things council did was it tasked this commission with forming a subcommittee that could assist in developing the program guidelines. So the ordinance, the staff report from the meeting itself will probably give you some sense of what those guidelines might include. There are a lot of other first-time homebuyer assistance programs out there at the state and federal level. Those give good examples of the kinds of issues that you would want to take into account in your program guidelines. I'm on the subcommittee with Mayor Beitlow. We're happy to assist you as well. But we would love to have you form a subcommittee that basically would work with staff to come up with your recommendations for program guidelines. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. But that's about what I have at the moment. I don't know if Kelly or Elena have anything to add that I've. Yeah, thank you, Kelly.
The only other thing that I would add is that we have another commission who's also has a subcommittee that they just appointed, and they'll be working on their portion of recommendations. So the Social Services Commission would be really looking at the what I would consider kind of the programmatic features that would be under their purview. And then the council's request for the Fiscal Commission was to look at the more fiscally related aspects of a program. So just that clarification.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that very much. In fact, that was part of the motion that I dropped in. I didn't mention that, and that's really important. So social services is concerned more with housing affordability and those kinds of issues. Whereas, as Kelly said, you're focused on the fiscal aspect. So anything ranging from various things such as how could the program be developed in a way that minimizes fiscal risk to the city? What are some, eligibility requirements that would help minimize risk? Looking to see if you can identify potential funding streams, because there is no money attached to the program yet. So anything fiscal related would be your purview, and we'd really appreciate your help.
Does anyone have any questions for Donna or anyone else? What's the general timeline? Endeavor?
Good question. I had a thought in mind, but I don't know if you have one as well. There's not an immediate urgency to this in the way that there might be for some things, in part because there is some steady existing funding. I'd love to see some kind of report back in 60 to 90 days, if that's feasible, and again, it's going to be something where you're going to be really working with staff and they're going to be supporting you. And I would ask Elena too, if that's a reasonable time frame for you to be providing assistance, because I know you're a very, very busy point in your work.
I think the question is what kind of information and what we're working with, because I'm not sure what kind of interactions we're going to have.
Yeah, and I don't know either until the subcommittee starts kind of formulating their thoughts, does a little research, comes back to you with questions. So it can be a very iterative process. You'll let us know if it's,
Has anybody on staff identified to work with the group?
It will be a combination of likely Dana Bailey, who is our Social Services and Housing Director. She works directly with the Social Services Commission. Then some combination of myself and Elena or designee from Finance Department.
Well, there aren't any other questions related to that. Would anyone like to volunteer? I know we had one area volunteer prior to having head out, but if anybody else is interested in participating. No. I don't think it's true. Leslie, I know, I saw you, we could only have 3 people, I think. So, yeah, Niall, Leslie and Darian, I think, I saw you guys on here, so, I'm not quite sure of the procedure for setting up a subcommittee, if there is anything else I need to do at this point.
You can make a motion.
Okay.
Someone can make a motion to appoint the 3 of them, or you can make sure, confirm that no one else is interested, or
Okay,
just confirm that. So by a motion in second.
So let me add to the discussion, and I'd be happy to make a motion to nominate them, but I think there should be a conversation too about, how they will interact and how they can meet outside the Brown Act. You should be aware of those things, and how do they interact with staff, and who's gonna take the lead at the first meeting. So maybe that could be developed later, but does this group have freedom to reach out to staff, or staff gonna produce the first work product? Maybe those aren't known yet, but if the goal is to get something in 60, 90 days, that'll be here in a wink of an eye. Right? So put those on the table, but I'm happy to nominate those 3 as being on that committee.
can you make a motion, or is that a motion? I don't know if that counts, does the language have to change? No.
If you want me to make it more formally, I could make it more.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, so. I would nominate, make sure I have the right members. So I know Niall, I know Darian, and who was the 3rd one? Yeah, so Leslie as, members of the subcommittee to work on down payment assistance with, city, staff and with the Social Services Commission.
Is there anyone who would second that motion? Okay, seconded by Steve. Is anyone opposed? Okay, great. Well then that takes us to oh wait, I didn't do public comment. Should I have done that?
You
can do that.
Ask for
Is
comment.
there anyone who is here for public comment? Anything that was submitted? No? Okay. Well, then we can move on to the next item. So the next item is subcommittee updates, for the Subcommittee on Socially Responsible Investment Policy. Thank you, Mitchell, for drafting, summary. And so essentially we're continuing discussions with community members regarding any concerns or feedback, related to the City of Davis's investment policy. We've reached out to several cities in Northern California and not quite received a response yet, but, continue to do that. And Elena generously reached out to the City of Davis's investment manager, PFM, to find out how investment returns would be impacted by SRI criteria and what sort of SRI criteria are currently in place. What would be the impact of changing these criteria that currently exist? For instance, adjustments to the city's current fossil fuel criteria that's within the policy, what SRI practices are feasible, and how are companies currently restricted for investment? Are there any human rights practices for corporations that are evaluated when selecting an investment? Are the City of Davis's investments aligned with any recognized frameworks, human rights frameworks? And is there an approved list of investable opportunities that the portfolio managers at PFM use when they are making their investments? Does PFM use any particular classification system, that sort of? And so we received a response on each of these questions, and so we asked for some additional details on them. But I'd be curious to know if anyone has any questions or comments, kind of at this point on this part of the update. Okay, well, so we're still continuing to kind of look at the landscape and see what else, what other cities have done, and also kind of assessing the responses that were given to us by PFM.
So you said you've talked to members of the community. Is your sense that this is a big deal to the community?
I think there are definitely, I think the people who reach out about it are the people who do feel very strongly. And so it's hard to kind of gauge in terms of you know, because people who speak out are probably the ones who feel the most strongly, but I think there have been city council meetings where during public comment, folks have made, comments around this issue. So I would imagine that, you know, there's an interest in seeing. Well, if no one has any other questions or comments, I think these are all things that we're gonna take a look at and will definitely make their way into a memo that that we'll be putting together. But yeah, if anyone has questions.
Will that memo, it's a process question, will that memo come to this committee to provide feedback before it goes to council, or does that work?
That's my understanding, yes.
Absolutely. Any recommendation that one of your subcommittees comes up with is considered by the full commission, and you take a vote on it as to whether you want it to send up to council, whether you want to make any changes. Absolutely.
You know, Donna, does it have to go through that new process through you? Because this was all done before that process.
So this is something that we specifically requested of you, and so we've asked for it in that case. So the two-person council subcommittee came to you and asked you to do this work. So this isn't technically subject to a new process.
Okay, well then, I will open it up to public comment in person or send it, no, then I think we can move on to the final item, the long-range calendar. I don't know if you want to present on this, Alina.
Just a quick update, we tried to update it, it's kind of, I'm gonna say dynamic, as we know more information, we update the calendar. I do want to point out a new item that was added to the April agenda, which relates to Village Farm project review. So this is a new development, and so it's in the process of being looked at. There's a couple of commissions, I believe, that will be looking at it, but there will be a presentation to the fiscal commission from a standpoint, like a fiscal standpoint, review. So that's just a heads up that this is a new item, and that's something you will be able to look at at the April meeting. So there was, I think, a question at one point, at what point in time the commission has the ability to look at fiscal impact of development. This is it. So we usually do not go back after the development happened to see what is the comparison of what we thought when development originally occurred versus, you know, years down the road once it's done. We don't go back to compare. I mean, that's probably something we would have to pay the consultants to do. But this is the original step that it happens when the development comes to, you know, commissions if needed, or city council for review. And this is the opportunity to ask questions and look at it from a, in this case, fiscal standpoint. The other item is, it's been asked, I believe, Mitchell, you asked to put it on the calendar, was for the infrastructure update. So we would like to get, if possible, some of the questions, if you may have, if there, you know, burning questions you have, we would like to have our public works directors prepared for it and be able to answer the questions. I think it's easier if they have time to prepare and kind of, rather than being on the spot answers. So if you have them, please forward them to me from anybody. And then I think it's going to make it that little more productive and hopefully in the conversation.
Is there, I guess, has this been presented in the past, the infrastructure piece?
There was a presentation, not maybe specifically related to some of the questions that were asked originally, which is part of the reason why we put it on the agenda. But there was a presentation a while back. Mainly it was related to what are the funding opportunities for the needs that we have. There was a subcommittee back then created between council, fiscal commissioners, and city staff, and then came back to both bodies with an update and kind of conclusions.
I think.
And go ahead. No, I was just gonna say that there was an update after that, just to see where we stand at that, I think it was a year ago, in terms of what the working group, worked out back then, versus where we are now in terms of what's available for funding, what the staff capacity is and things like that. So because things do change.
I was just wondering if there's some, maybe materials that could be helpful in like formulating questions, because I'm not so familiar with infrastructure to even know what questions to ask. So if there's some sort of slide deck that you think could be helpful in just framing,
I can refer, maybe send out a reference when these items were presented to either city council or fiscal commission in the past, and
yeah, that'd be great.
maybe you'll be able to watch it.
Yeah, no need to reinvent the wheel, but like if you have any direction on that, that'd be helpful, of course.
I think generally, and I know it's not always easy, to the extent we can get material before we hear it here, it's very helpful. Like, I mean, the presentations were both very, very helpful today. Had we had that slide deck, a couple days ago, I think it would allow us to sort of understand better what's important, better questions, et cetera, Particularly as we start getting into some of these fund updates and whatnot, seeing it cold is very, very difficult.
If possible. I mean, I know sometimes maybe some materials are probably just sent over even the day before or something. So maybe if there's something older, or even if you wanted to direct us to like city council meeting on this date, that we can probably do our own work on this. But thank you.
So we have more questions on the infrastructure. So just double check, are we talking primarily about road and road maintenance, or is it a broader topic in your opinion?
I think original question from Mitchell was just in general broader topic. But I'm not sure what questions you may have, so I don't know if it relates to streets and roads, and if that's the question. That's why I'm asking for them in advance, because it would be easier to prepare to answer the question.
Because we have had presentations in the past just about road maintenance and whether we're on track to make improvements. And I always thought that was useful, since that it's something that a lot of people experience is unsatisfied with the road, and we got good explanations. So if that was on there, I think that'd be a plus.
Any other questions or comments?
How do we get this going? Do we get this going, the down payment assistance evaluation? Is there some official step, or do we just commiserate amongst ourselves?
Well, I think, well, probably, I think it's probably, you can, a little bit of coordination, I mean, just based on my experience with the other subcommittee, a little bit of coordination, amongst yourselves, but probably, Donna might have some tips, or Alina might also have some guidance on.
Okay, so should we just sort of back on to
So the three of you are free to meet without compliance with the Brown Act notice requirements. You can just meet at a coffee shop or in your home or via Zoom. And because it's less than majority. And then if you want any guidance, happy to provide it, as with Mayor Vitla. So however often you want to check in with us, yes.
Are there any sort of like background documents on this? Or do we just go to whatever the last city council meeting was?
There aren't yet, but as I did with Reka earlier with her subcommittee, I did put together some materials, because some of the things and I can take an item to do that. There's some existing programs out there. It's helpful to look at them. I do have some other materials that community members have provided to me. I can share things with you that, to get your ideas flowing. Definitely you'll want the staff report, and probably want to watch the council meeting where we discussed it, so that you will see the concerns that were raised. So those are just a few ideas.
We're still talking about the long range calendar, correct? Yeah, so if you're taking input, I see for June, there isn't a date set, and that may be fine. But maybe it's a normal date, but I think the big issue to me is alignment with the city's budget process, and being able to provide meaningful input before the council meets. I see we have the mid-year budget update. That's to me not necessarily the decision point, but sometimes in May, earlier in May might be a better time for this commission to deal with the budget review in order to provide any kind of recommendations to the council. So I'm not sure how it plays out with the council timing, but I'm raising this as an issue because that's been an issue in the past.
Generally, budget introduction is going to council and budget, council gets to see the budget first. So then we try to present it to also the commission, so you have the opportunity to ask questions or, you know, have time to review. The way it goes to council usually happens in 3 steps. It will say it's the introduction, then there's a meeting for any question and answers that may, you know, come up. And then a 3rd meeting, an actual budget adoption. So somewhere in between after the intro happens, it also goes to the fiscal commission, where usually fiscal commissioners have an opportunity to ask questions. In the past, there were questions provided by, you know, the subcommittee was created, somebody reviewed the budget, there was a list of questions to which staff then responded, and they were presented to council at the same time as responses to the council questions as well.
So in terms of alignment of the council process, I think I'm hearing you that the commission, it would meet and ask questions between the 2nd and 3rd step.
Well, between probably first
First and second
and
step?
second. Well, yeah,
Okay, well then I have to see the schedule with the council, because I don't know if that makes sense for us then in June. Does that sound right? That sounds late to me.
the introduction of the budget right now is scheduled for last meeting in May for the city council meeting. And then first meeting in June for council to come back with question and answers. And then adoption is scheduled for the 2nd meeting in June. We're required to adopt by July.
So we're meeting then either at the end of May or early June, if that's between. Okay, well, sounds like you've given us some thought, but I want to make sure, because I think that's been an issue in the past.
And this gets to, the point you're bringing up really good, because it gets to our role, I think. And I think it would help, maybe Donald, you could, provide some input on this. It's just, does council want us to be a precursor to look through the budget and provide questions and whatnot insight? Or is it better suited for you guys to see it and then ask us specific questions?
So there's been a very long standing practice, and back when I was on this commission that you're on as well, where, as Elena said, it is introduced to council first. That is just their desire, that is the practice, it's been that way for a long time. But then there is a little bit of time between the first consideration of the budget and the second, and that's a really critical juncture. That's when people are really digging in, figuring out if there's, you know, some alignment they want to do, some cost savings, whatever's going to happen. And to your question, David, too, a couple times in the past, in order for this commission to provide timely feedback, we've moved the schedule a little bit. We've moved a meeting if we needed to make it sure it fit in the time, that you actually had time to really review the introduced budget, come up with a lot of questions. And in the past, we tried to kind of coordinate the questions from this commission with the questions that were coming up from the council's budget subcommittee. And we try to consolidate them, and then you would answer them all when the council considered the budget the second time. I mean, it's a pretty accelerated schedule, but we absolutely want your feedback on the budget for sure. It's just a matter of getting it in there at the right time. So I think trying to do it before introduction would be very, very challenging. I know for Elena's group to try to squeeze in, she'd have to push her own calendar back and have it ready several weeks earlier than she does now. I think that would be pretty challenging.
By the way, you're looking at the latest budget team right here.
Okay, if there are no more questions or comments, I will open the floor for public comment. Any submitted, okay, then can move on to the final, piece, which is adjourning this meeting. Can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn the meeting.
And a second? Second is Steve. And with that, we adjourn the meeting at 8:11 p.m.